Tim and I used to say, if we win together, and if we lose together. And through the whole process, we're going to know that we invited God in. We invited him to speak. To the best of our ability, we're making this decision. Nothing's foolproof, and nothing promises us the pink bow at the end.
Hey guys, welcome to the Something New Show. I'm Mindy Linscomb, your host, and I've already been crying in the studio today before we even started this episode because I have a dear friend here. This is Ann Evans, and she and her husband, Tim, have made a huge impact on our lives. So I'm so indebted to you guys. And you guys were married for 43 years before Tim got to go meet Jesus.
That's right.
And so it's just been so cool to look over our lives and see so much evidence of his faithfulness, right?
And it's been so cool for us and now me to look back at the people's lives that God intersected us and see you guys flourish and have kids, and the legacy goes on.
Absolutely. There's so much I can say. It's like, where do we begin?
I know. Let's jump around. We can do a lot of
Jump
jumping.
around. Well, I think what I really connected to when I first met you guys is you're from my same hometown, Chicagoland, and I loved how your husband was a chief fire department. I don't even know the name.
Schaumburg. He was deputy fire chief.
And it's just fun to hear him tell those stories, and he's just a big, tough guy. And then you're a nurse, and then you guys decide, hey, we want to help couples. Yeah. And that was how many years ago that you decided you wanted to help couples?
Oh my gosh. Well, we had been married maybe 3 or 4 years, and we had come to Christ in that time. So we started to attend a local church that was meeting in a movie theater. And it's not that Tim and I weren't God aware. We were both raised in homes that love God. We went to church, all the things. But we had never heard about this God who was a good God, that was a personal God that wanted to be involved in our lives. And so we made a decision. And I think shortly after that, because God did so much transforming in our marriage, we kind of, not that we wanted to do marriage ministry, but we wanted to pour out what God was pouring in, and that happened to be marriage ministry.
So you started working with couples.
Started working with couples, volunteering. We did premarital in the church that we attended. It was funny because Tim was a fireman, paramedic. I was a nurse. So, I mean, we were young. We were maybe 34. And they did a conference, and this couple did finances, and this couple did communication, and the head of the ministry said, and you and Tim, why don't you guys do sexuality? And we're like, really? Really?
You're like,
and
why us?
They're like, why you? Because you can pronounce the words correctly. So that I guess, qualified us. And the kind of good thing about that was, the responsibility that you feel when you stand up and talk in front of other people or teach or mentor, or we felt such a responsibility that what we were teaching was what we were living. So that ended up being a real motivator for Tim and I to get serious about God, because it wasn't just for us. And I think the sad part is that we want to do better for others and our kids sometimes than we want to do for ourselves. And that was true of us. So we wanted to make sure we're doing good for our kids and others, and we took God very seriously.
Wow. And as you were working on your own marriage, that just kind of led to you developing, hey, what do we believe about marriage?
Right. What do we believe? And I never saw Tim as the boss of me or the one that was making all the decisions. We did everything so much as a team. And we had that team mentality, especially him with the fire department and me with nursing. You function on a team. Like, there's no independence. And so we started to search the scriptures, and one of the mentors that was mentoring us was a professor at Wheaton College. So we audited classes in our 30s, got babysitters for the kids in the afternoon. Tim got off the fire department, and we were at Wheaton College taking family marriage classes. And he talked about he took us all the way back to the beginning, to Genesis, and he talked about equality. functional and intrinsic equality between couples and how they were both given the procreation mandate and all of that. And so we started calling it co-leadership. We're like, we're co-leaders. That's what we are. Like, I'm as valuable as you are. You're as valuable as I am. So it's not that we built a doctrine around that. We started to look for the word, and the doctrine just unfolded in front of us. And so we started sharing that with couples, and they really responded.
And I still remember our first, we did years of counseling with you, and I still remember some of those early lessons sitting there going, wait, what? Tell me more, and you were just saying, to your point you said before we started, just you remember the look on my face because nobody had ever talked about that with us. Right. And so maybe if you don't mind explaining it a little bit, just because I think nobody is better at explaining it than you guys, just kind of how that leads into decision-making processes, and how does that lead into what it actually looks like in a daily form, because I think we're all told that, submit to your husbands, man is the head of household, which I'm not saying, that's not correct. I'm just saying you posed it in a way that was really interesting and made us think, and it did change the way we move forward. And I still remember Tim telling us, he's like, just try it.
Yeah, just try it.
He's like, let me know how it works.
Yeah.
He's like, all I can tell you is this way you're having problems, what you're doing now. That's not working, right? And we're like, right. He's like, try this. And so I'd love for you to explain some of the early sessions, maybe just in a summary of what you guys explained to us and how we kind of moved in our path towards that.
Well, so many different ways we could go with that question, but
Right.
I think sometimes we have to see what we're doing wrong before we're open to seeing how God created it or meant it to be. And I think in our early marriage, we tried all sorts of different techniques to make decisions and live together in unity, because Tim and I were very different people. He's a visionary and a strong leader and very sanguine, extroverted, the life of the party. I'm more introverted. I'm very much a detail person. I want to know how we're going to wrap this up and how all the pieces are going to fit in. So when we tried to make decisions, sometimes we would do things like maybe an egalitarian couple would do. An egalitarian meaning two people believing that they're equal. They might say something like, well, it's my turn to make the decision because you made the last big decision, so it's my turn. Or they might say, well, this decision impacts you more than it impacts me, so why don't you go ahead and make it? Tim and I tried that, and here's how it didn't work. I think we would get into a decision like it's your turn to do this, but inside I didn't really believe that we should be doing that, even though it is granted your turn. And then when that would unfold and play out, let's just use something practical, like let's say buying a car. I don't think we really need a car, but it is your turn. We do have the money in the bank. Everything makes sense, so let's go ahead and do it that way. I would find myself resenting the decision because as it played out, it might have not been the best thing for us. Like we needed to keep that money in the bank, or now this came up and that wasn't expected. And I think what I was mad about wasn't that Tim made the decision. It was that I didn't voice what I thought because I surrendered to that it's your turn. So that didn't really work for us. And we tried all sorts of things like, Tim, how about you go to the Lord and you hear from him, and then you come back and tell me what the Lord said. And that didn't really work either because God spoke to me too. And he would come, and by speak, I don't mean in an audible voice. I mean maybe an impression or a gut feeling or something in the word where a verse lights up and you feel like you're hearing from God on that particular section of scripture. So that didn't work for us because I would resent that we weren't taking into account what God was telling me. So Tim and I started to, we were being mentored by somebody that believed in co-leadership. They believed that a man and a woman need to come together as a team, like Adam and Eve in the garden, and they need to take equal responsibility, and they equally had a relationship with the Lord, and they both walked with the Lord, and they were both given the creation and procreation mandate. God didn't say to one, this is what I want you to do. He always spoke to them. So, so many ways I could go with this. Tim and I are kind of practical people. We needed a tool for how to do that. And I was thinking, how can we invite God into our lives and have him be an integral part while we're still young in the Lord? And it's not my knee-jerk reaction to invite God in, not because I didn't want to. I just wasn't used to that. So I was driving one day with the kids in the car, and this is kind of how God speaks to me. And I'm at an intersection, and it's really crowded. It's a Chicago intersection, and people are beeping their horns, and they're anxious to go, and they're, anyways, I'm looking, and I'm realizing that all of these people in the intersection are responding to that tiny light in the middle of the intersection, and that tiny light is keeping us all safe. It's protecting us. It's getting us ready for the next move. And so that started the wheels in my head turning, and I came home and I said to Tim, what if we prayed and said to the Lord, just in our simple, young Christian language, Lord, would you do that for us? Would you be our light? And could we surrender to you? Would you, like, for instance, when you don't want us to do something, would you just give us a red light? Would you give us a yellow light when it's slow, or maybe not right now? And would you give us a green light when it's go? That sounds maybe kind of basic, but Tim and I just made a pact, and we said, okay, here's how we're going to do it, because we always had, Tim being fire department and military, we always had a way to do things, like logically. He said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to each individually pray to the Lord when a decision comes up. So you go to the Lord, I'll go to the Lord, and then we're going to come back together, and you're going to tell me what you sense the Lord was saying to you, and I'm going to tell you what I sense. So we did that, and sometimes we had the same light, sometimes we had a different light. And what Tim and I agreed on is if the two are one, and if God created us as one, and he wouldn't speak to us in different voices, maybe there's something inside of us that needs forming or changing or maturing. Maybe, for a lot of different reasons, we need things to go our way, or we need to control things, or fill in the blank. So what we found out over the course of years as we lived that out and practiced it is what God was doing in us was far greater than our obedience to him. He was maturing us, and he was teaching us what it's like when you can't have everything you want, and what it's like to surrender, not to the other person, but to him, to the Lord. There's so many examples, Mindy, that I can give you, but some of the early examples for us that really encouraged us to continue using the traffic light was, we call it the motorcycle story. It's in one of our books. And Tim always rode motorcycles. He loved motorcycles. He was a safe motorcycle driver. He used to say, when you're riding a bike, if you're not under the influence, if you're not drinking, if you're rested, if you're focused, the chances of getting in an accident when you're really present and alert are really slim. Not that it doesn't happen, but so I trusted that Tim was a safe driver, and he wanted to get a bike. A guy at the fire department was selling a bike, and when you're a fireman, firemen are military, and they're usually pretty good at taking care of their stuff, whether it's their car, their motorcycle, their personal self. They're always very structured. And so Tim said, I'm going to buy the bike from Dave. He just bought it, and I went shopping with him, and I saw him pick it out, and I told him to pick it in blue because when he sells it, I want to buy it from him. He used to cover the motorcycle with a blanket at night in his garage, and he would wash it and take care of it. So fast forward years later, Dave comes to Tim and says, hey, the bike's for sale. It's yours, but I need to know in 24 hours because I got 3 guys in line that want to buy it. So that was right at the traffic light decision that Tim and I made. And Tim came home. He's like, it's a slam dunk. I'm buying the bike.
I'm green light all the way.
He didn't even think about the traffic light. He was just like, I'm going to tell Dave. I just wanted to tell you. And then right when he was walking out the door, I go, Tim, remember? I mean, no big deal. You can buy the bike. But remember, we made that decision about praying about it. Perfect opportunity to test it out with the Lord. I know he's going to say yes. That's why I was so eager to do it. So he said, okay. So I went to pray, and Tim went to pray. The next day when we were putting the kids to bed, I said, hey, I want to talk to you before you go to bed. He's like, yeah, what's up? I said, the strangest thing, but I prayed about it, Tim, and I just felt like the Lord gave me a yellow light. Not no, you can never have the bike. Not And I really don't know why the Lord said that. We have the money. I believe you're responsible. I'm not afraid of you having a bike. All of that is green for me. I'm just telling you what we agreed to and what I sensed. What do you sense? He goes, oh, it's so green for me. It's not even funny. I mean, I barely had to pray about it.
He didn't have to pray about it.
He didn't have to, because there's some things that you want to do in your life that you think are so much from the Lord. Do you really need to pray? It's almost like I know how he thinks. So Tim did commit to pray. And he came back and he said, I got the same thing. It's a yellow light. I don't know why. Fast forward ahead, that was one of those times, Mindy, that the Lord was teaching us. Sometimes he's going to tell us things and direct us things, and he's not always going to give us a logical answer, and it's not always going to line up with what our logic is on earth, like you're a safe driver and you're a good husband, you don't go out and overspend, you don't take advantage of us financially, you don't. These are all my logical reasons why you can have it. Sometimes God trumps that and says, it's just no for now, just slow for now, maybe later.
And we won't always know even the answer.
And how good are we really at not knowing the answer to just about anything? You know, as soon as things happen to us, we want to know why, and we want to make it logical, and we want to control it so that we can feel like we've got some kind of power over it. So even in those early days, the Lord was teaching us to surrender to him and to trust that he's good. And even in his goodness, even when we don't understand, he's got our best interests at heart. So the motorcycle story, that was one of those magic stories that we didn't always like to tell part two, because that's not how life usually goes, where it did come around. The bike was sold years later back to Tim from a guy that had bought him when Tim turned it down, and we ended up having it in our garage for 20 years, and it always became our traffic light illustration. But God did give it to us like 10 years later. But other examples, you know, I won't go into all of them, but there's been examples when I really thought God was going to say no. And we went to prayer, and I was like, I really feel like it's okay if we do this, even though that doesn't really gel with what I'm feeling in my gut. So we started learning not to honor and surrender to our feelings so much, that the relationship with God was higher. And over the years, over making decisions, and weren't always big ones, they were sometimes tiny ones, I think God taught us how to trust him. And that was the mechanism, the tool that he used to teach us independently to trust him. And I mean, I could spin off into so many conversations around that, because you look at couples who are completely opposed or very different or negotiate life differently, and they work so hard to try to change one another, or for this person to be louder, for this person to be quieter, when really maybe sometimes what we need is to surrender to God and to get closer to him and celebrate those differences in one another, trusting that God is going to lead us.
I remember hearing all this. We had to work through many sessions, right, to really understand how to apply this, because it was almost like a reprogramming.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that you see that a lot with couples, is a reprogramming, and kind of like, oh, wait, this isn't how we've been making decisions to this point. Now we got to kind of realign our thoughts. But one of the things that stood out to me in a time with you guys was Tim saying very adamantly, he's like, do you think that, you know, you're smart and we're just supposed to sit on that and not use that towards the decision-making equation, you know, Jordan or me? He's like, no. He's like, God gave you guys two amazing, smart people who are walking with God, who are seeking wisdom, who are reading the Bible, who are trying to make, you know, the best with what they know. And we miss and pick up different things because we're different people. Mm-hmm. So he's like, why are we not using that as like playing on the same team? To your point, it's like, it really hit me and validated kind of a feeling I have in my heart that a lot of times women, especially in religious settings, are told to like, hey, keep your opinions to yourself, because just let your husband make the decision. And I do have a really smart husband. I totally think he could make the decisions. But when we sat there, Tim was like, but don't waste what she brings to the table. Like, she brings a lot of alternative thoughts that maybe would help you make an even better decision if you have those together. And it really resonated for both of us because I don't think Jordan wanted the pressure to have all of the decision be on him, because then if it goes right or if it goes wrong, it's all him. And then we felt so relieved to be like, oh, if we make that decision together, there's not this pressure of it was my fault or your fault. Because honestly, that was some of what we were dealing with is, okay, fine, you're the head of the household, make that decision.
Right.
And then whenever it go wrong, it was like, well, I told you shouldn't have done that.
I know. It's like, why didn't you say something if you knew it? And that was my story, where Tim would be like, you know what, you're not being part of the solution. Why didn't you tell me if you had so many reservations? And it's like, I thought I was doing what I was supposed to do. So I think we found out by default that all those other ways weren't working for us. One of the things you just said, Mindy, is the reprogramming word. And, you know, reprogramming in religious settings is always kind of a scary word to have somebody reprogramming you. But when you think about how we're programmed, so much of it, without getting into a big discussion, is cultural, what our culture does, and so much of it is family of origin. I have a magnet, it's in my purse, but I have them at the office, and it's a little magnet that says, who told you that? Like, who told you that the marriage is supposed to go this way? And who told you that you had to be quiet? And who told you that your word wasn't valuable? And who told you that your strength was to be tempered down when a man's strength is elevated? And it's like, look how strong he is. Like, he's unbelievable. He just cuts through all the stuff at a meeting. But when a woman does that, it's appeared to be like, no, she needs to be tempered. And so who told us that? We started going to the Word to say, who does God say I am? And why would he create me this way if I need to be tempered down? Like, you were always such a strong woman. Why would God create you that way and then put you with someone who didn't have the same personality or temperament that you did, like to punish the two of you, or to say, oh my gosh, you both have so much to access from one another. What if you work together as a team? So it doesn't really have anything to do with gender, who's the man, who's the woman. It doesn't have anything to do with temperament. It has a lot to do, for Tim and I, was for spiritual gifts. Like, the way we function as a couple had more to do with our spiritual gifts than our male-female,
Yeah, that was another thing that was really big with you guys and our time together. You said you are stuck with some gender roles. And I was like, I am? I mean, it was a blind spot. And I didn't even think about that, but I was feeling very obligated to cook and to clean and to be the person in charge of laundry and blah, blah, blah. Well, it turns out Jordan loves to cook.
Who knew?
Who knew? And he's from Louisiana, has a great time in the kitchen. And I don't dislike to cook, but it's like he really loved it more. And I would say we have different strengths that maybe aren't the traditional gender role. You know, he's amazing with our finances, so he does the finances. But what I would tell you is, you said in one of our sessions, is like, put your best player in that spot. So whatever the spots are on, you know, what needs to get done around the family, the household, your agenda, put your best player there instead of the gender that you think has to play that spot. And I was like, huh. It was just a lot of freedom. And I think this is maybe more normal now, 15 years later, right? Like, this was 15 years ago when we were talking about this. But I think, you know, as moms and wives are in the workplace, career oriented, there has to be a lot more conversations around who's meant to do what in our team, and let's see who's the best player for it and has the best gifting towards it, and like release any sort of preconceived notions that needs to be just because that was how our parents were. And like you said, your family of origin.
Yeah.
And reframing the belief system of what we bring to the family.
That's right.
So
I think about, we used to live in Schaumburg. It's a suburb of Chicago, right on the outskirts of O'Hare Airport. Like, they all surround the airport. And there's a couple of big corporations there, and Motorola was one of them. Zenith was one of them. Sure, they're not there anymore, but successful companies, think about Apple right now. They've got mission statements and vision statements. And if you work for a corporation like that, you better believe that as an employee, you know where they're going and what your job is and how you function. And if you don't, then it's a reflection on the leadership. why aren't we doing that in marriage? Like, how many couples sit down and say, where are we going? And how are we going to do this? And who is our strongest player? And what's a gender bias? And what's a spiritual gift? And, just all those questions where you figure it out for yourself and kind of build a strategy and a game plan so that you're not constantly being pulled down by cultural norms that are taking you in a direction that doesn't fit the two of you. And you're always trying to squeeze yourself into this fantasy of the way marriage should look. And I picture God whispering to me all the time, who told you that? Because it wasn't me.
That's a really good question. This episode is sponsored by Something Blue 30A. Looking for the perfect vacation spot to disconnect from everything, put your feet in the softest sand, and enjoy a fresh, renovated 2-bedroom, 2.5-bath townhouse right on the beach in my favorite place in the world? Well, 30A is situated in the Panhandle of Florida, and I'd love for you to check out Something Blue 30A on Instagram and make it the perfect place for your next vacation.
All the way back to the garden when the Lord said, where are you? Like I always use that illustration. He wasn't asking because he didn't know. He was asking because he wanted the man and woman to know that they were hiding. He wanted them to know that. Like, do you realize you're hiding? So instead of shaming them and saying, do you realize you're hiding? He said, where are you? And they're like, oh, we're hiding. And I think sometimes that's the same question God is asking us because he wants us to know what he is saying about us, not what the culture's saying about us, not what other people think about us, but he wants us to come to the conclusion, oh, that's how you formed me, and that's how you gifted me, and it's okay for me to be this way. And me and my husband, me and my wife, we actually function really well this way, and we don't have to feel bad about it, like we're not submissive enough or not fill in the blank. We have plenty of things that we think we need to be, fill in the blank.
Well, we learned your whole traffic light principle and decision-making framework right before we entered into one of the hardest seasons of our lives when Brody was diagnosed with cancer. And I don't know if we've ever talked about this, but we, within 48 hours of being in the hospital, we find out your child has almost stage 4 cancer. It's just not in his spleen. It's everywhere else in his body. You have to make a decision on which protocol out of these options to treat him with. I mean, there's all these different ways in which we could tackle his cancer. There's this 6-month version. There's a 15-month version. There's go to St. Jude's, stay here. There's so many options.
It's up to you.
It's up to you. Jordan and I were, 34 years old, 33, 34 years old, trying to make a very big decision for something we felt very ill-equipped. We don't know the names of these medicines. We've never researched cancer treatment plans. And we reached out to our parents. They're like, we don't know what to do. They're like, we'll just be praying for you. Yeah. And then we called, our friends that were in the medical field, asking them their wisdom. And they're like, there's pros and cons to both sides, both treatment plans, different places, and gave us some background on some of the meds. And ultimately we looked at each other, we're like, man, nobody's going to know what to do. Like, nobody is telling us it's clearly this or that. And so we looked at each other, we said, okay, this is where this whole unity principle that Tim and Ann taught us, this is where it really counts.
The rubber really meets the road.
Right. And we said, okay, we've been applying it on, should we buy this car? Should we buy this house? Should we take this job? Should we start a business? We did applying it, but those things really are little decisions when you look at, life or death.
Life and death.
Life and death. So we decided, okay, we're gonna do the stoplight method. And this is all we got. So he took 24 hours because we had a newborn too. We had just had Blake. So he took, 24 hours. I had the newborn in the hospital for 24 hours. He went home to the 5-year-old. I was with the 3-year-old and the newborn in the hospital. And we just prayed and prayed for 24 hours. We said, we're going to come back tomorrow and we're going to tell each other which protocol we both had a green light on. And regardless of whatever happened to Brody, we made a decision. Whatever happens to Brody, we will know that we both made this decision together There'll be no pointing fingers or blaming or saying, well, you chose this and he died and it's your fault or whatever. Because that's really normal in
Very normal.
cancer patient, especially pediatrics, for families to get a divorce because of all the stress and a lot of decisions that are made that one spouse just leans on the other to make all the decisions. And if it doesn't go well,
They resent it.
resentment. So we said, okay, whatever we choose, we're not gonna hold it or point fingers. So the next day we came together and we both had a green light on the same protocol. So we just said, all right, we're gonna go with all focus, all ahead, hands on deck, trust that the doctors are going to take care of our child. This is the hospital for us. This is that we had to choose our oncologist and then also our hospital. And all of those decisions, we use the stoplight principle. And I will just tell you, regardless of thankfully Brody is here today, but regardless of what would have happened, I knew Jordan and I's marriage would make it through because we applied those non-resentful practices. And then it's just now everything else has been so easy, Anne. Yeah. I'm like, that's life and death. I'm like, man, okay, we can get through that. Not saying that we haven't been thrown other curveballs in the last 15 years. Absolutely, we've been thrown curveballs.
Nothing like that.
Nothing like that. And because that was like our real test.
Yeah.
And once we passed the test, I felt like, okay, you can throw other things at us, life, but we're a team. Like Jordan and I are committed to making sure we're making those decisions together. And sure, we absolutely pray and trust God before we make a decision, 100%. So I'm not saying we do it in our flesh, in our own humanness. But what I will say is we will not proceed with a yes or a no without being in unity. And I can hear your husband's voice still today. Unity trumps disunity. And he would say that to us every day as we left your home. And we're like, yes, sir. Because disunity, maybe you could speak into that, but like what are the downfalls of disunity in marriage?
Oh, it's the beginning of disconnection. And you see so many couples, again, in reverse. I learned this in reverse. When I got married, I knew what I wanted, but I knew what I wanted because I knew what I didn't want. And I saw so many couples that were together in covenant and probably pretty sure that they would never divorce in a lifetime, so really committed to God and the covenant, but not at all connected to one another, not a team. And so I see disunity as being a way for people to drift further and further apart in a safe way. You stay on your side of the line, I'll stay on my side. You take responsibility for your stuff, I'll take responsibility for mine. But what you and Jordan did when you processed through that, you were so wise to have foresight and say, here's what I don't want to happen at the end. I don't want us to find out that our choice was not a choice for life for our son, and for us to blame one another and for us to resent one another. So Tim and I used to say, if we win together, and if we lose together. And through the whole process, we're going to know that we invited God in. We invited him to speak. To the best of our ability, we're making this decision. Nothing's foolproof, and nothing promises us the pink bow at the end. But I am secured in knowing that I invited God in, and God knows my heart, and God knew our struggle, and God heard us crying out. And so he protects us and unifies us. So, yeah, that's a harder decision to make in the moment. The easier decisions to make is, well, I don't know, whatever you want to do, because I don't want responsibility and this is too heavy for me to carry, so you make the decision. That's easier in the moment, and it becomes your next problem. So it's easier in the moment, and then it creates a whole nother scenario that's much harder to work through. So just bite the bullet and start from the beginning. And if there's disunity, and you and Jordan would have had not 2 green lights, it's case by case, but Tim and I would say, then keep processing, because God is more interested in a husband and wife being united than he is in anything you're praying to him about. So not that he's not interested in your son, but he's so much more interested in your unity, because it's your unity that's the model for your son. So it becomes the framework for which your family thrives. So if the two of you are off track, then all the good things you're doing are not landing. They might have temporary results. I'm not saying they don't have temporary results. Of course they do. Otherwise, people wouldn't be doing them all the time. but lasting connection, it's not the road to connection. Our real road to connection with people who are very different from us, who think differently, is being connected to God and seeing other people, our husband, our kids, our friends, the way God sees them.
So good. What are you thinking?
Just how many different ways you can go with these kind of conversations. I mean, there's listeners might be like, well, what about this? Well, what about that? Don't we wish that there was a book that just made it simple, that kind of gave us a roadmap for the 1, 2, 3 on how to do this? And there isn't a book like that. But when we have a good God that we can go to with the most complicated stories that aren't like the other person's story, they have this nuance or that nuance because we all think we're so unique. And when we learn that we can trust God, then we can surrender to him. I think one of our biggest problems is that we don't trust God enough to surrender, and we're like little orphans building our own city every day. We wake up, we get dressed, we're like little elves trying to, what are we going to eat tonight? Where are we going to work? How are we going to make money? How am I going to, and we're trying to figure it out all on our own. We're reading self-help books, we're doing all the work, and I think sometimes the Lord is saying to us, why are you working that hard? Like, why don't you just come up, sit on my lap, and tell me what your struggles are today, and let me carry them. Let me help you. So my whole younger process was learning how to trust God enough to let him partner with me in life, because I was pretty independent. And usually independent people that are sometimes highly functioning, can get a lot done, are coming from a wounded place, a self-protected place. They've learned that behavior from somewhere to not depend on anyone. So I had to kind of unwind my story and be like, okay, one of my ungodly beliefs, one of the lies I believed in my life was that people can't be trusted. I still struggle with that sometimes. Like, I can't try, I got to do it myself. I am a one-man show. I can do it better myself. And so my godly belief that I always say to myself to reprogram my mind is, some people can be trusted, and I can trust my good Father to lead me to them. So no, the godly belief isn't that everybody can be trusted. You're wrong. No, some people can't be, but some people can be. And you can look for them and ask the Lord to bring them into your life, and God will lead them to you.
One of the ungodly beliefs that I had when I was in counseling with you was, and you pointed it out, it was a blind spot, was that I believed I was the glue that held everything together. Held my family together, my family of origin, my, business and all the things. And while there is some level of leadership to that, as a parent or as a CEO or whatever, there was an unhealthy, I think, carrying of the responsibility where you helped me really work through that and be like, no, you know what? I'm not the glue. God's the glue.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, when we believe that we're the glue, in some scenarios it really works and it gets us where we want to go. But we're talking about big picture. Is that a theme that we want to live with in our life? And when we believe that we're the glue, we start over-functioning, and people start praising us like, I can't believe how you can knock it down and get it done. And, you did all that by yourself. And then we start to get like, yeah, I'm really capable. But here's what happens in relationships when you're overdoing. Let's use marriage. I'm overdoing, doing everything, taking responsibility for Tim, feeling his feelings, rescuing him when he's not asking to be rescued. I kind of have some codependent tendencies. I end up turning him into an under-functioner, because after a while he just sits back and is like, well, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it wrong. If I'm going to feel it, I'm going to feel it wrong. So I might as well just sit down and watch TV while she over-functions. Me, as part of that partnership, ends up feeling resentful after a while and unseen and unnoticed, because my over-functioning was never really about him. It was about my own
ungodly belief that I was the glue.
My ungodly belief and my being uncomfortable with my emotions and other people's emotions. So I'd run in and fix them for him, run in and fix it. When what I really needed to do was take a deep breath and say, what about this is really triggering me? Why is it so hard for me to see you in so much pain? Why do I feel like I need to fix you, to intervene, to give you the roadmap, to tell you what I would say? Why don't I just sit in this with you? And why don't we pray about it and see what God has to do to heal you, to heal me? So that over-functioning has a real codependent side to it that it's hard for people to miss, especially when you're a highly functioning person, because we think of codependency as addiction. Like, I'm not married to an addict. I'm not an addict. My parents weren't addicts. Like, that doesn't fit me. I'm not a codependent. And there's a weakness to codependency, but highly functioning people can be unbelievably codependent.
And when we talk through, all of the ungodly beliefs that somebody has, it's like an exercise you do with them. We work through, writing a new statement for that belief that we were carrying. What would be the new statement that you would tell someone if they believe they're the glue?
Oh gosh, I'm not good at coming up with new statements on the fly. I would have to think about that for a minute. Do you remember your godly
Yeah,
belief?
it's basically that actually God is the glue. I'm just here to be the best mom, wife, whatever I can be, but I can't keep people together. I can't keep people happy or strong. That's not my job, and it never was.
What I like about what you put in the godly belief is God is the glue. You always want your godly belief to be a true statement that you know that is true. What you don't want your godly belief to be is this extreme, like, I'm not the glue, God's the glue, so then I become this weak person. It's like sometimes God gives me the ability to be the glue. It's almost like some people can be trusted, but not all people. So you recognize the times that it really works for you and it helps you function, but you recognize that God is the glue, the glue that oversees it all. So I don't know if that makes sense,
Yeah.
but you want the godly belief to be a balanced statement, not again, God is everything and I'm nothing. What I believe is wrong and what God says is right. It's like, well, no, God's given me that tension because part of it's right, but I'm not depending on him. So many things connected to this conversation, isn't there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we could go in a million
Directions. I mean, all the hours I'm thinking through,
Yeah.
and essentially, I just keep going back to also control and how, whether that's the co-leadership who's in control of the decisions, or that's, believing certain ungodly things about your life. It's like, it's releasing control. I mean, this whole thing is about having an ultimate dependency on God to move forward on anything.
And it's also being able to differentiate, because control isn't all bad, right? There's godly control. I mean, there's self-discipline, being controlled by God, making godly decisions for my life to be a disciplined person. That's all godly control. But I want God to differentiate for me the difference between godly control and ungodly control. So I always pray like simple prayers to the Lord, like because Tim was a fireman and where I was talking about alarms going off, my prayers I was like, Lord, set off an alarm when I'm in ungodly control, because it doesn't always work for my benefit. So I want to surrender the lies connected to control that don't serve me well. And I really want to lean in and develop the godly control parts. So again, that godly statement embraces both the negative and the positive, what God says is true, and then how I need to be.
Mm-hmm. So good. I mean, I'm really hoping that our listeners are hearing so much gold here when it comes to how do two strong people in marriage come together and make decisions all the time, from little to big, and truly saying, hey, let's pause and let's work together in unity. It's so powerful. I mean, it's the theme of your books, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, definitely. And when you say two strong people, like the first thing that comes to mind is strength isn't bad. And you could name a million good things around strength between you and Jordan that have really worked for you. But because of my own story, because of the lessons that God's taught me, it's not the only way for healing, but it's been my way. I've had to unpack my past, and I've had to have God show me, where did my strength come from? like, who told me that? Like, was that a strength that came from you, Lord, that I want to develop and nurture? Or was that a strength that came from the enemy that taught me how to protect myself and protect myself from pain, from other people, because if it's that kind of strength, I don't want to move forward with that in my marriage. I want a godly control. I want a godly strength. I want everything to be from you. And there's so many things in our life that mimic God but aren't really God. Like the angel of light, they call that in the Bible. Like, some things look like the angel of light and they're really not God at all. They just look like it. So I want to get to know the Father so that he can tell me what's from him and what isn't. So I want to keep moving toward the Father so I've got access to that.
And like you said, it's not always in an audible voice, or maybe it never even is.
Never.
And some people are like, oh, you mean you can hear God? How do you hear God? And they feel this pressure of like, I don't hear his voice or his audible speaking to me. But I mean, there's so many other ways that God can confirm what you're feeling. Like, do you want to speak quickly about
Absolutely
how you can feel if you're hearing God?
Well, I think that I always use the illustration in a workshop about my brother when he was dating his wife, Carol. She had 3 sisters and a mom. And so when he first met Carol, he would call her up, and her mom, Vera, would answer the phone, and he would say, Carol? She'd be like, no, this is Vera, I'll go get Carol. He'd call again. Carol? No, this is Leslie, I'll go get Carol. And my brother would say, that went on for about a month, but as I got to know Carol more and more and more, I just shake my head. I would never pick up the phone now and hear her voice and not know it was her, because we've spent so much time together. We've had so many conversations. Like, I've grown to know her, to know and be fully known, that it's unmistakable to me. Of course that's Carol. Why did I think her mom was her? So I think sometimes we don't really know God. We haven't leaned in and spent time with him and been through like what you've been through with your son and all those things that have included God. Like, you know him. Like, and it's not an audible voice, although I'm not denying it could be. It's never been with me. But it's a kind of an inner knowing, like I know that that's the Lord, or something in Scripture will light up, or a verse will come to mind, or there'll be a set of circumstances that come together in life. I'm like, that could only be God.
Mm-hmm.
And so learning to hear God's voice, learning to trust him as a good father is one of the foundational lessons of our life that only enhances our marriage, because we're not looking for the perfect mate. We're looking for somebody. Tim used to say about the girls, our girls, when they got married, I just want them to marry somebody that loves the Lord way more than they love my daughters. Because if they love the Lord more, my daughters will be fine. So what would it be like if our aim was to find somebody that loved the Lord more than they loved us? We would have the overflow from that. We would feel so completely loved because they would be able to surrender to God even when life wasn't going their way, or they weren't getting the promotions, or they would believe at a foundational level that God was good. So maybe that's a question for listeners is, do you believe that God is good? And religiously we always say yes, because that's the right answer, right? But do you believe he's good to you? Like, have you actually experienced God's goodness? My daughter gave me a framed picture that I put right next to my bed, and when I wake up, just because I sleep that way, it's the first thing I see. And the frame says, the slogan says, I have seen the goodness of God. Like, when you have witnessed that in your life and experienced it, there's no words maybe to give it to somebody or to tell them what that's like, but that confidence that comes from seeing and experiencing the goodness of God secures you foundationally. That even if your spouse disappoints you, even if your marriage isn't what you thought it was going to be, even if your kids aren't turning out the way you planned, you know that God is with you and he's telling a story through your life, and you haven't reached the end chapter yet, and you're still in the middle, and there's more to come.
Amazing. So encouraging.
Yeah.
Really encouraging. Thank you.
We all have to learn how to live in the in-between, don't we? We're not good with that. We want the end of the story. We want the answer to the question. We want to know that 1 + 1 is 2. And learning to live with the not knowing is an exercise I continue.
Thank you for that.
So fun to be with you today.
You too. I see you brought something. Is this for one of our listeners?
What?
Well, this amazing book.
I just brought it. This is the first of our books. This was the book that really laid the foundation when you were talking about co-leadership, together, reclaiming co-leadership in marriage. When I think of this book, I see it in print, and it always kind of surprises me because as I read the pages, it's the stories and the lessons that God taught us when we were early in our marriage. So it's not that we ever set out to be authors or write books, but as Tim and I were getting older, we didn't have the kind of ministry or maybe even the spiritual gifts or the capacity to reproduce ourselves and to have the ministry get bigger and to bring people on. So we really wanted to write down what God had taught us in book form. And a mentor once told us, you'll reach more people with the written word than you ever will with one-on-one counseling and workshops. So this is the first of a series that we wrote. And really for me, it's when I look at them, it's the lessons that God's taught us about communication and prayer and sexuality and, all of it. So we never set out to write those. We just agreed with God to record the things he was teaching us.
So good. Well, people can read more and find out those resources and what you guys are what you are up to now at RL for real life, rlministries.com.
That's right. Go to our website. The books are available. You can contact me on the website. My offices are on the west side in Old Colorado City, right like on 24th and Colorado Avenue, so right downtown.
Well, we have listeners from all over the world. So
Come on
you
down.
are here in Colorado Springs, and we're really lucky to have you in our backyard. So thank you for being here, Ann.
I love you so much.
Love you. Yeah, what a good episode. You guys drop some comments if something stood out to you. We'd love to stay in touch. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe to the show, rate, review, and share with a friend. Also, follow The Something New Show on Instagram and Facebook. If you want a fuller experience, watch the show on YouTube to help you create a life worth celebrating.